Welcome to the February 14th Raymond Planning Board meeting, our Valentine's Day meeting. The board will come to order. We do have a quorum, and we'll start with roll call with Danielle.
Danielle Stumper.
Patricia Beaton.
Sheila Burke.
Greg Foster.
Ed Kranich.
And we also have our recording secretary, Mary Quirk, and our contract planner, Jim Seymour, and Scott Dvorak, our code enforcement officer. We do have a published agenda, and I don't have the right one.
There you go.
The second thing on the agenda is approval of minutes for August, September, October, November, December, and January. Mary's been hard at work. We have a special election of officers. I am the vice chair. The chair is opted to be off the committee, so we do need to have a special election. We have new business, an applicant, Chase Custom Homes and Finance Incorporated. The location is on the Valley Road, and it's the review of already pre-approved subdivision for compliance with current subdivision standards. We'll have planner communications and adjournment.
Then we'll go home.
We'll start with the approval of the minutes. We'll take them one at a time because some of us were absent. The first,
There you go.
August.
These are all in order.
Oh, you're so good. What are these?
Those are the minutes. Till August 9th.
Oh, okay. Yep, the first minutes are from Wednesday, August 9th. All of us were here at that meeting, so do we have a motion?
I have one correction on page 2, Mary. You just repeated my motion, so the motion is just duplicated.
Okay.
Not a biggie, but for accuracy. I move that the August 9th, 2017 minutes be approved as amended, or as corrected.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, none. All right, we have the minutes from the September 13th meeting. Do we have a motion on that?
I was absent, so.
I didn't mark any notes on it. I make motion to accept the September 13th, 2017 minutes as written.
Any discussion? I've misplaced all of mine, but I believe that one had, is that the one that had Bruce as vice chair? It's just a minor change. I think it should be chair.
Where?
I think it's
Right in the
Greg-
very beginning.
Yeah, Greg Foster.
Oh, okay, he's chair here.
It's just punctuation, yeah.
Okay.
And darn it. Just wait a minute.
No
I
problem.
think
Actually, I did that on both August and September.
correct. Which one is this?
It's that
No,
copy and
that's it.
paste.
All right, we have a motion to accept the minutes as amended. Did we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
You abstaining?
I was
Yeah,
absent.
she was. All right, we have the minutes from the October 11th meeting. Do I have a motion on?
I move to accept the October 11th, 2017 as presented.
Any discussion?
I just, in the last paragraph of the first page, it's just misspelling. I didn't know if that was you, all
I'll
right, so,
correct it.
or was no, and it's not, and opened.
was not. Okay.
Okay. That's the only thing
He was no applicable.
Any other discussion?
what is it?
We had a second, or did we?
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Now, let's see, we're in December.
November.
Or, my apologies. All right, the November 8th minutes.
I was absent.
Do I have a motion on accepting the November 8th minutes?
Just one typo, the adjournment, Mr. Sanford asked for a motion to adjourn, not to a motion to adjourn. I move we accept the November 8th, 17 minutes as corrected.
Second.
Any discussion? Accept the minutes as amended? All those in favor? Opposed? Alrighty. And we'll get in the new year, January of 2000.
December.
We just finished November,
Oh.
now we're doing December.
I'm still learning my months. Okay. Very good. The December 13th meeting, do we have a motion on that?
I move
those
that we
minutes.
accept the December 13, 2017 minutes as written.
Second.
Any discussion?
I abstain. I wasn't here.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Now can we go to January of
Yes,
the
you
new
can.
year?
I think that's a good idea.
You're gonna have to keep me in check. We have a motion on the January minutes.
I move we accept the January 10th, 2018 minutes as presented.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just the, under planner communications, I think that's just a moving of the next meeting to the bottom line.
Yes, Kyle.
Are we all set with that?
Yep. You can take a vote.
Sorry for the wait, folks.
Okay, we had a second. All those in favor of accepting the January minutes as amended? Opposed? Very good. Our next order of business is special election of officers. Bruce Sanford resigned, and as vice chair, I have taken over, and at this point, we need to vote for the new officers. There weren't enough. We needed to have 5 to vote at the last meeting. We did not have 5. We have all 6 of us here now, so we can move ahead with our special elections of officers. Do I hear any motion?
Motion
Tricia?
to nominate Sheila Burke as chair and Greg Foster as vice chair.
Do you have any other motions? Do I hear a motion to cease nominations?
So moved.
All those in favor? And I think I need to vote on the officers now.
Right.
Kyle, you voting or? No. Okay, you can.
Okay.
This is for your,
Yeah, we waited
this is
for
for
you.
the board.
Okay,
We
all right, I
were-
didn't know if this was stuff from the last meeting or not.
No.
No,
Yeah, I'm
sorry,
fine.
Kyle.
Okay.
Yep.
6.
Do we need the motion read back? I'm just teasing.
Wield that gavel.
All those in favor of the nominations for officers of the planning board? Raise your hand.
6.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. And Sheila is Madam Chair.
Chair, I'd like to make just one remark before we get started. Rumor has it that our former chairman, Mr. Bob O'Neill, might be back in town sometime in the warmer weather. So I'd like to express that I will keep the seat warm until our Raymond expert returns. I think I still have a lot to learn, and I would look forward to Bob being reappointed and a special election. So with that said, we'd move to the next order of business, which is the Valley View Acres subdivision. Is the applicant here to make a presentation? Hello, me.
Thank you very much. My name is Tom Greer.
Hold on one second, we're gonna get you a microphone.
You get to go karaoke.
No, you don't want to. My wife,
It's for our viewers at home.
my name is Tom Greer from Walsh Engineering. I'm pleased to be here tonight. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. What I'd like to do is briefly go through an overview of the project, give you an update as to where we are with DEP and that type of thing, and then work our way through Jim's memo. It seems to me that would be the most efficient way to make sure we cover all of the issues and that type of thing. This is an overview of the whole project. What we're looking at is Valley Road running along here. What you see colored in green and other colors is the project itself. This is the entrance off Valley View. We come in, Valley Road, come into a cul-de-sac and have individual homes around it, and then another cul-de-sac again with individual homes around it. 10 of them are going to be age restricted, and the remaining will be free open market homes. So there'll be senior over 55 residents that will be restricted to those homes. Overall, the acreage will end up being that this portion here, which is about 52 acres, will end up going to the state of Maine. The bottom portion of this, we abut Morgan Meadow, and so that will be added to that. I'm working with Scott Lindsay of IF&W. He's the
State
biologist who's in charge of that particular piece, and was supposed to walk the site either right after deer season or not. I've sent him a few emails and have yet to get a return back from him again, so we don't know exactly where he is. I made a little bit of an error here. This strip of land here and here are not included in the project. Our project line is in this area here as it comes down. So these ones that are but Valley View are not part of the project. Those are existing homes, and what we've done is cut out the aerial photograph around them just to give you an idea of where the homes are located. The remaining portion of the project is divided into 3 lots that are on here, and we have a fair amount of open space, another 7 acres, which is this area in through here, and then there's an area across the front here that is open space with the project as well. It is the exact same layout that was previously approved by the board, and we've brought it forward to get the standards updated so that they meet current standards, is what we're here for. We have submitted this to DEP. That application was approved prior to this. It was extended once, and then it was not extended, so it expired. And what we're doing is going back through that process. In terms of changing regulations, the DEP had a couple of regulations that had changed. One of them is the Stormwater Management Law, and that involved the 2 wet ponds that we have here. The wet ponds are intended to treat the stormwater and meet the phosphorus standards. The previous application had some wet ponds that were not in the 3-to-1 ratio and didn't give us the right treatment factors in order to meet current standards. We've gone through and re-engineered both of these ponds in order to meet current standards and bring the phosphorus calculations up to today's standards. We also had an issue with the amount of wetlands. Previous to when this was approved, you could fill up to 20,000 square feet of wetlands without having to pay an impact fee. That's currently at 15,000 square feet. We were slightly over 15,000 square feet, and working through with the DEP, we determined that reducing that amount of fill would be advantageous to us. So this section of the road right here was re-engineered. We actually, instead of coming in and going up and having a fair amount of fill in that area, we've actually brought it down a little bit before we come back up, and we were able to reduce the fill to something less than 15,000 square feet. So the DEP is reviewing our NRPA application for the wetland fills, as well as the stormwater management, as well as the site law piece. The site law piece would involve the location of the septic systems and wells, as well as other issues that deal with waste removal, those type of things for that application. Overall, we think we're in good stead, that we meet the current standards of the town of Raymond, and that we'll be looking for approval of this project as is. I think I have a drawing that gives you a little bigger view of just the development area. Looks a lot the same. We've just eliminated the open space here, so it's a little bit bigger view of how the homes sit in here. Overall, we're in 2 watersheds. We're in the Little Sebago watershed, which is generally sort of a line through here. This goes in that direction, and the rest of it comes down this way towards Raymond Pond. If you go through our drawings, you'll see 2 different logos. This logo here is the one from the original approval, and then some of the drawings have a different logo on them. Those are the sheets that were actually updated and revised as part of the overall project. They're mostly stormwater management details that deal with the ponds, that type of thing, in order to bring it up to current standards. With that, I'd be happy to go through Jim's memo, point by point, if you want, and see where we're going there.
Now, I think what I'd suggest to the board is, before we go through that, we, to be more efficient with our time, so all points are addressed, that we open it for a public hearing, see what questions get laid on the table, then open it to board questions to our applicant, and at that point, I think we want to go point by point through the subdivision standards and criteria. Does that sound like a good approach?
I have one question before we open the public hearing. On these drawings, they're from '06, so the abutters are possibly out of date. Were the abutters updated and properly notified for the public hearing?
That's the job of the code office and planning office in the town, and yes, they were, on tax rolls.
Okay, you guys looked them up to?
I took care of all of those, yes.
But to your point on the final subdivision plan, those may need to be updated on the drawing itself.
Yes.
I said it would be likely that on the final subdivision, we would need those addresses and names updated on the final subdivision.
Okay. So if that is okay with the board, I figure we get all our questions on the table before we go point by point. So at this time, I'd like to open our meeting to a public hearing. Does anybody have anything they wish to say or ask? If so, please take the podium, state your name and your address.
And there is a sign-in sheet up there.
Yeah, and there's a sign-in sheet. If you could sign in for the record, we would appreciate it.
Wednesdays, Valley Road, Raymond. I don't know any of the abutters. I'm just wondering if there's gonna be a size restriction on these homes, heights, dimension-wise, things like that.
Sir, I think what would happen is, as each lot is sold and an application for a building permit then comes forward to the town, they would have to be constructed in accordance with town ordinances. So at this point, we don't know exactly what, but we do know that they would be held to current town ordinance in terms of building. Does that help you?
The other question, yes, it does. The other question I have is, I was involved in this way back in '06, as other people here were too. I don't know where the age of 55 elderly ever come in. I cannot remember that. I have a little problem with that, because I'm over 55 and I don't consider myself elderly yet, first of all.
Here.
The second is, to me, that don't mean nothing. One 55-year-old person can move in one of these and have their kids, grandkids, and everything else move in. So to look good, as far as I'm concerned, on having half of these, say, elderly doesn't mean nothing to me.
We hear your point. We hear your point.
This was quite a project from the get-go years ago. It is what it is today. So that's my main concern. I know it's going to give a lot more traffic on the Valley Road. That traffic has really increased since they paved and upgraded the road a couple of years ago. When I built there in 1980, there would be 4 cars all day long on that road. I can't get out of my driveway now without waiting for 4 cars. And we're going to add 26 more. So that's my main concerns of it. And a lot of people are concerned on the watershed down in Raymond Pond, which, the wastewater thing and everything running downhill towards Valley Brook. But I don't own the property, and they have the right to do things with the property, so I understand that.
Okay, thank you,
you.
sir.
And the state property that's going to be the open space, they have an easement on my property from Valley Road to get to that. That was all done. I did not own that piece of property at the time that was done. Mr. Hamilton did, since I have purchased it. And the easement is now on me, so when it comes time for that, I'd like to be involved with it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else that would like to speak?
My name's Gary Whitner. I actually own 3 properties that abut. My home at 157 Valley Road, a piece of property behind my home, and also where my son and his family live on 145 Valley Road. And at the risk of being repetitious, I'm sort of going to repeat a lot of the concerns that were just mentioned. With one correction, which is, 26 units, most likely that's 52 cars. So, I'm also extremely concerned, and I'm curious to know, has that been studied, addressed? Is there some sort of limit that this is under in terms of traffic? I mean, my mailbox gets smashed, every few years with the traffic patterns now on Valley Road. And from my calculations, as approximate as they are, I admit, I figure this is going to double the traffic on that road. I got 2 grandkids who live there, and it seems dangerous to me. That's my first concern. You want me to mention them all, or one by one?
If it's repetitive, we'd ask you not, but if you have some different ones, that would be fine.
Well, there's an overlap for sure, but, I'm curious to know if there is a finite number of cars, if in some, rather than just voicing a concern, I'd like to know if there is, in fact, some sort of standard or
No, but one of the things, if you'll bear with us, we'll be going through the criteria for a subdivision, and one of the things that is talked about is the supportive services and all those kinds of things. So we'll be discussing that in more depth as we move forward tonight.
Great. My other concern is my well, and how, if at all, again, has this been studied? We're adding 26 wells to the aquifer, so I have grave concerns about that.
Okay.
And then the third one is simply wildlife habitat. I don't know, maybe I'm coming into the party late and all this has been discussed already, but I drive home late at night on those roads and I see beavers and all kinds of small animals crossing the street right in that general area. And so I was concerned about wildlife habitat. So it was traffic and well water and wildlife.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any additional comments or questions from the public?
Good evening. My name's Dave Thompson. I reside
Dave, could you
down
sign in, please? Just sign up on that sheet right there. Thank you.
down at 9 Peppercorn Way. That's right off in Raymond Pond. I'm also part owner of 58 acres that go from my lot up to the Valley Road at the foot of the hill where this development wants to be placed. My biggest concern is the water. The Valley Brook does run down through my property. There is an impact at the foot of the Valley Hill with beavers that have dammed up the culvert, and the water is backed up on the other side of the road quite a bit. We've been with the town and asked them, if they could take care of it. But with the impact of this development, we all know what runs downhill. And I believe with a conversation with the gentleman here earlier this summer, there was going to be like 13 septic systems for the 26 units. That's a lot of septic systems. And my point is that everything runs downhill. That's going to go down through the brook, down into the lake, and Raymond Pond doesn't stop there. It keeps going right down to Crescent, right down through into Sebago, and so forth. That's my biggest concern.
Okay, thank you,
That's all
sir.
I have to say. I'll write this now. I couldn't do it.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. Do we have any additional comments or questions from the public?
I'll be ready to wait in a minute, Dave.
Good evening. My name is Deb Baker. I live at 23 Valley Road, and I have property on Plummer Drive, which flows from Valley Brook to Raymond Pond. I have property that counts on a spring about a half mile from where this development is, where I need quality of water. It's maybe only seasonal, but it's a concern for many people. In addition, I'm the president of Valley Shore Association, where I have a lot of property that is very concerned about the quality of water that comes from the spring between Valley Brook and Raymond Pond, in addition to the quality of Raymond Pond. As my cousin Dave Thompson mentioned, we've had damage to our property, which is right along Valley Brook, because of the beavers. And it may seem silly, it's beavers, but we're talking about issues that are up above us, like this subdivision that affects the Valley Brook, which affects Valley Brook and all of the property. You've all paid attention to what's been happening with Casco. Nathan Whites has been involved in situations with us because of damage to Plummer Drive. It is a private drive that is paid for. Everything that happens up above does affect us. What affects Raymond Pond does affect, just like Dave just described. We're at the highest quality, and we need to consider these at all times. On October 14th, there were over 20 people who met with Tom. We have this. He spent some great details over what this plan was. Mary provided some information about the people who had property received information. The town of Raymond never received any information about that walk on October 14th. We were there. Tom met with us, went over details beside his car on Valley Road. He had to leave. He said, Deb, no, excuse me, Tom, I apologize. That's inaccurate. He said, you can take this information, and if you guys want to, I have to leave to do something else, but you can do the walk. This was a Saturday. And I also want to make sure that you know Planning Board received information, officials in the town of Raymond received information about this walk on October 14th. Nobody from the Planning Board, no official from the town of Raymond did this walk. And Tom did not join us when we did the walk. John Rand, Conservation Committee member, did this walk. A number of people from Raymond Waterways and other people who are concerned about our lakes notice wetland issues. And they're coming up tonight. That's great. I'm really pleased. My question is this, and I'm pleased to hear that yes, family members who have property around this property did receive information about this public hearing. 2, I'm glad to hear the DEP is reviewing. I heard that tonight too. I'd like to know what DEP is reviewing. And I have to also wonder, just to point out that there is some issues. The bottom line is, I guess I need to know, and I don't know if it's appropriate, and you can lead me here, is what is the difference from what we learned on October 14th from the public of the town of Raymond that is different tonight? We've got the document. We know what we were told. We've got the list of the names of the people who attended, and there are a lot more that are here tonight, but we trust upon you as to make some decisions that are based upon water quality, DEP requirements, subdivision pieces that you're taking a look at, safety issues. All of those pieces are things that we need to take a look at. Is it possible to ask what the difference is between what we heard on October 14th that we are here
Yes.
tonight?
As soon as we close public hearing, we'll get down to some of this stuff.
Thank you
So
very
we
much.
appreciate you coming. Okay,
I
thank you.
appreciate it.
Any additional comments or questions from the public? No, in that case, I'd like to close the public hearing. Public hearing is now closed. You can gavel for me. Thank you. Public hearing is now closed. What I'd like to do next is just address one issue that was just brought up before we get into the subdivision criteria review. Your walk and whatever on October 15th, the Plan Board had no business in front of it to be part of that walk. That's not our charge until such time as there is an actual application in our possession. We do not involve ourselves outside this. So we had absolutely no authority to be involved in that particular walk or meeting or whatever. So it really wasn't a matter for the Plan Board at that time, nor the town of Raymond, because until we received this application, we really didn't have anything to move forward. Jim?
Yeah, I'd just like to explain that a little bit more detail. Because their site location of development permit had expired, they were obligated to reinstate that and reapply. That walk you did in October was per the requirements of the state permit, not the town permit. There's a state permit involved, which is the DEP. And then there's a subdivision standard, which is the town. Those are two distinct and separate review process. So what Tom was obligating was meeting his requirement per the DEP in October.
Our public hearing is now closed.
That's,
I know.
Okay.
I believe there was a statement that DEP did not need to do anything. That was communicated to the people attending that
That's not,
meeting.
that's,
I won't say anything.
okay. Let's,
and so
that's
currently.
quite all right.
Yeah,
Go
so
ahead, Jim.
currently, that application is still being, if I understand Tom correctly, that application is still being reviewed by the DEP for the site location of development components, the stormwater management, and the wetland impact as well. Going forward, what we determined and what we've got a legal opinion on from the town is that because this was approved in 2006 as a subdivision and recorded, we were told by our town's attorney that we could not review the actual division of the property. In other words, we couldn't go back and look at the lots and how they were divided and cut up and all that, or the number of them, But what we could look at is any of the standards that had changed since 2006, or anything that they amended as part of their updating application. So tonight, the board is put in a little bit different scenario in that they're not looking at the number of lots, how the lots are laid out, but they can look at the performance standards and requirements that go into that, if they changed or if they have provided information that they're amending or revising them. That's per
Okay.
our town's attorney.
So what I'd like to turn to now is our technical review, and I'd like to go item by item, allow the board to ask questions and also ask some clarification from our applicant.
Just before we move off this, what I had told at that meeting, we went through a very detailed piece, that we did have to do the DEP application, which is why we were there. What I didn't realize at the time is that I had to come back to the town. I was under the impression that the town was all set because it was a previously approved subdivision. The ordinance changed last June, and I was not aware of that. That was the piece that I said we didn't have to go back through, so it was the town piece of it, just to clarify that.
Appreciate that. Okay, is the board ready to proceed? Huh? So the first subdivision approval criteria, what we are doing tonight, folks, is we're going through Article 7, minor subdivision, Section 2 submissions.
That should be major.
Major subdivision submissions. Our first order of business here is to go through each of these criteria to determine if the application before us is complete. We don't move to approval until the submission criteria have been met. So there's two separate steps that we're going through tonight. So the first one is to go step by step through criteria to determine if the board has questions before we rule on the completeness of the application prior to any approval. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure everybody's clear what we're doing here. Okay? So the very first criteria under that statute is it will not result in undue water or air pollution. In making this determination, the planning board shall at least consider the elevation of the land in its relation to floodplains, the nature of soils and subsoils and their ability to adequately support waste disposal, the slope of the land and its effect on effluents, and the applicable state and local health and water resource regulations. Does the applicant have anything to say to that criteria?
Yes, I think that's a lot of what we've submitted and what's in the DEP application to further give some detail there. What we've provided to the board is a plan that shows all of the stormwater management pieces that controls the water runoff. That includes piping and drainage swales, the two wet ponds, and the like. There's also locations of where all the septic systems are going to be located. A geologist has gone through and predicted what the effluent leaving the septic systems would be and where it goes and what criteria is used to judge whether that's adequate or not. The geologist has also made statements about well locations and water supply based on the recharge rates of the overall site to make the conclusion that there is adequate water supply for a property and the number of units that we have before you. We also have an erosion control plan that's for during construction to make sure that any excess sediment doesn't leave. We are in a watershed of the Raymond Pond, and we recognize that, so erosion control obviously is first and foremost a concern on this site. We also have looked at the overall property in terms of where it slopes, where it goes. There are phosphorus calculations that are included with that. Again, protecting the downstream watersheds, our duty is to meet certain phosphorus requirements based on state standards as well. All of those calculations are part of your application.
Does the planning board have questions on this particular criteria?
Just one thing he said in there. It's not necessarily part of that information was
Right.
not part of the town's application, but it's part of the DEP
Correct.
application, which is on file with the town. But again, just
Correct.
separating the two.
Okay, for the purposes, let's just move to the second one, and then we'll go back and decide if we have a complete application. It has sufficient water available for reasonably foreseeable needs of the subdivision. Do we have questions from the board to the applicant? Okay, this was, again, this particular issue was previously approved, and there are no changes anticipated by the development for the concern with the domestic water supply. We do have one condition that was placed prior, was the requirement to sprinkle all homes, as outlined in the fire inspections memo.
And we intend on doing that, Madam Chair.
There's also a blurb in here about a dry hydrant that was
Yes.
talked about. Now, is that still
Yes.
on the plan? That's still serviceable? I think, what was it was
the-
in here, just the location of it
Sure.
wasn't depicted.
The application has a box to check, and it says existing hydrants, and that was checked. That's not correct on the application. What we should have checked was other. Our plan is to install a dry hydrant. The person filling it out knew the plans and that we were installing a dry hydrant, just checked the wrong box. This pond here has more than adequate water for a dry hydrant and meeting the NFPA standards for that. And we have a pipe that comes out to the street here so that that it will function as a dry hydrant. So our overall plan is to put sprinklers in the homes as well as provide a dry hydrant right on site.
Okay,
Okay.
but that's not currently noted on the documents or the plan?
It's noted on the plans, it's all shown, it's just incorrect on the application. The application box should have been checked other and then to be installed instead of existing.
Now, as far as the requirements for that to service a dry hydrant, is all that information included as well? So if we have to go back, and let's say we go down the road and
Yeah.
something changes, it's supposed to meet this requirement, do you have that in a set of plans or somewhere depicting that it has met requirements and this
Yeah.
is what it?
It was originally reviewed as part of the original approval, as part of that, so
Okay.
I assume it was part of that original approval. I'm not sure that this current application brought forth those calculations. They would not have been something that I would have included in the DEP permit. So certainly we can provide you with the volume that's available. That is on the plans as part of the stormwater calculations as to how much volume is available. It just wasn't clear that that volume is available for fire protection.
Okay.
Tom, can you point out where that hydrant is? Either I missed it or I didn't see it on the plan. I'm just. Okay.
What are you referring to? What is this?
Pardon?
Where's this?
This is the Jim's memo. Pardon me? I don't have an extra copy.
Mary, do you have an extra copy of Jim's memo? I don't think I got it.
I may have an extra cup. I don't know if I grabbed the extra one.
Somebody else did.
Double check that because I just noticed the copies I brought, I'm missing every other page.
I gave him mine, so.
If we have one extra,
Yeah, we have-
Danielle also needs
We
one.
have the right pages.
Okay.
Yes, sure.
Do you have this?
I got mine on my screen right here.
That's what we're going for right now. Okay, we're still investigating on the plans the dry well.
It's supposed to come out maybe in that intersection. I don't see it.
We don't, and that's the challenge, none of us can find it on the plans.
I can see that. It will be there on the next set of plans
Yeah,
for
most of
sure.
our drawings are from '06, other than the last few pages with the drainage.
Well, it would probably be on that road, I would assume it would be on road and profile sheet C50A, because that's the intersection location where it would be.
Yeah.
But I didn't see it, so we just need to add
Yeah,
that. And we'll need
Yeah.
details for you to review as well.
Okay,
That
so,
was, that was the intent, was to provide that as a dry
okay,
hydrant.
so we agree it is not on the plan at this time? Okay, good.
And the reason it's at that location is from a hydraulics point of view, it's pretty much level with the pond, so that the suction lift is very tiny.
Okay, the next criteria we'll move to is will not cause an unreasonable burden on existing water supply if one is to be utilized. Do we have any questions from the board?
And for those that didn't have the benefit of seeing the DEP application, there was quite an extensive amount of work done by the geologist on the septic systems, and you actually have a sheet within here that you can see that
Yep.
well and septic plan. But there was a condition that came from before as well, that the first 10 feet of all wells had to be provided, I believe, with solid casing,
Yes, we'd case it into the bedrock.
just so there wouldn't be any surface contamination.
Okay. Any other questions from the board on this criteria? No? Moving on. Criteria D, will not cause unreasonable soil erosion or reduction in the capacity of the land to hold water so that a dangerous or unhealthy condition may exist. Do we have questions from the board? My understanding is that within the DEP application, we'll be doing a confirmation regarding the amount of impact at 18,457 square feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, it'll be less than that now. It'll be about 14,000 something, I forget exact numbers, but it's less than 15,000. And that reduction occurs in the first couple hundred feet of the road where we cross the wetlands.
Okay. Does the board have questions? Do you have questions on this one? Ed?
How did you reduce the wetland impact, lowering the grade so
Yes.
your slopes don't go out as far?
Correct. We took roughly 3 feet off the road, and that 3 feet on both sides brings it a little narrower.
Tom, can you just point out where that rock sandwich detail is and where that was done?
The rock, there are two wetlands. There's one in here and one in here, and the rock sandwich is in between the two of them. And reviewing this with the Army Corps, they wanted two things. One of them was there an additional culvert in here, so that we've put in an oversized culvert that will have a mineral bed placed in the bottom of it, essentially a 4-foot culvert with soil in the bottom, which allows critters to go back and forth. So it's a critter tunnel. And the other piece they wanted was to hydraulically keep the wetlands more or less intact. And so what we've done is put a rock sandwich in there so that any groundwater that comes through the wetlands will continue through the rock sandwich from one side to the other. That way the lower side of the road continues to have a vital wetland.
One concern I'd like to raise is that all of the data that we have on wetlands goes back to 2004 or so, which is very, very old, prior to the time when most of us were also concerned with vernal pools and all of those kinds of things. So can someone educate me on the DEP application? Would it require remapping? Because wetlands change a lot over that many years.
Correct. Those were remapped by Mark Hampton. Not this fall, the fall before. Were in the fall. He remapped them and reflagged them. So if you go out there now, there'll be yellow flags on the
So we
on the
have, from
wetlands.
the fall of 2016, those wetlands were remapped? Is that what
Correct.
you're saying?
Correct.
Were any vernal pools identified on this property?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
So I have one question. Did Mark verify the existing wetland flagging, or did he place new mapping delineation?
He placed new flags on it, and then it almost identically matched what was done previously. The only place that he got a little lost is down in this corner in here. There may not be flagging on these lots that ends up going to the state, but anything within the development area was reflagged.
Reflagged.
as well as this area out in here.
Okay.
Can I ask which lots are they? that he's pointing them out, and I'm looking at this, and I can't figure out which lots he's talking about.
He's talking about the open space area.
Would you mind, I couldn't see it there.
Yeah.
Can you show me where that is, that's
This,
different now?
this area down in here, he may not have reflagged this area.
Okay,
When
that's where many of us walk through.
Yeah, when he got down into this area, on the end there, he wasn't sure that he was on the property or where he was. So when we downloaded the data, this area in here was all pretty good, in through here and in here.
So
That-
the major concern that I
Yeah.
had was the wetlands impact in the about-to-be-developed areas, and that was all remapped and is part of what gets supplied to DEP to do all of the more extensive reviews regarding their drainage and water movement, okay? All right?
And I think one thing that we will want on a final plan is to note that those were actually redelineated by whom and a date, so that, you know, we're current with the
Yes.
standards.
Yes. We'll
come back to that,
We'll
I'm
come
sure.
back to a couple of notes, okay. All right, so, is the board satisfied on criteria D? Ed, did you look like you had a
I have
question?
one more question about the rock sandwich in the road. Do you have a detail or anything, or can you provide that?
I thought there was one in there.
Think.
It shows it in the profile, but let's see.
Yeah, it doesn't show.
It's probably on our Army Corps submitted to them. I don't know if it made it to these.
What are you trying to get at, Ed? Maybe you can answer the question.
Well, I don't know exactly what a rock sandwich
Right.
Yeah.
consists of.
Okay.
It
It is a
should have
different,
complete drawing. It should have a detail on it.
Yeah, essentially what we do is we remove the organic material underneath the road for just normal construction. Typically, you would put gravel in that location. Essentially, what we do is put down a geotextile. We put a rock layer in there and then another geotextile over the top of it, so that the rocks have a greater void ratio and allows water to freely pass under the road a little easier than,
Like a 12-inch rock, something like that.
yeah, 6-inch.
6 to 12 usually.
Yeah, that type of thing. So it's again, it's a sandwich of geotextile and rock if you were to bite on it.
One thing I would note in this discussion is, it's not the preferred method of construction here in the town of Raymond, if at any time that street would be applied, to become a town road.
Yeah.
Right now, this is private, but at such time, if that was ever considered as part of being taken over by Raymond, that's probably not going to fly real well, just so that everybody's clear about that.
Probably we should have the city engineer weigh in on that, if it would be an acceptable.
Well,
Yeah,
in
I've-
fact, it's a private road, I think.
Well, I
it's-
mean, in the future, just
Yeah.
for that.
And I did have a conversation with Nathan today, and, you know, he was, again, because it's not part of the standard makeup cross-section of the road, if something were to happen, you know, it would take the town extensive amount of work to fix or repair that. It's obviously a question that's gonna come up in the future, but I think we've shot the so-called scud across the bow here to let them know that there's a potential issue if they do wanna solicit that for a town road.
I just want that on the record. It might have to be changed, or who
Right.
knows. Again, that's a future issue, that's not our purview, but I just wanted it noted. Okay, we're moving on to E. Are we good? Everybody good? Okay, moving on to E. Will not cause unreasonable highway or public road congestion or unsafe conditions with respect to the use of highways or public roads, existing or proposed. Questions from the board?
Tom, I know we we can't look at the number of units or the number of lots. Do you have an estimation of how many trips would be generated daily? From a curiosity standpoint, I assume that that's below a traffic movement permit?
Oh, well below it. Typically, you're going to look at a peak hour of somewheres in the 22 range, 23 in the peak hour. Total daily trips would be 220, something like that. So you would be well below the 100 in the peak hour would be the beginning of the traffic movement permit. So you'd have to have a much larger project.
So just to clarify for the public, what we're talking about here is within all the various regulations in the state, if traffic reaches a certain point as defined, then a traffic permit, if you will, has to be considered. And that permit includes a traffic study where they would validate the number of trips per day. What we are discussing here is the fact that it does not come close to that requirement. Therefore, in terms of this condition at this time, other than a condition regarding road names, there's really no authority that this board has regarding the number of cars that are going to use that road, because it's well below the state requirement. Is that correct?
Yes, there's one condition that was, again, I found going back into the old conditions of approval, but in talking with Nate, that may have been rectified, I'm not sure, which was site distance. And back in '06, there was some concern that some of the branches or some of the vegetation may have to be cleared that was close to the street to maintain the 400-foot required site distance. I'm not sure whether that's been reevaluated or if the town did improve that.
Yeah. I thought I read that somewhere in here in terms of the site
There's
distance.
been some ditching out there that may have removed some of that. Certainly, if it's an issue, then, clearing back the brushes could be an annual thing.
Okay. Let's just keep that as a note that we want to come back to. And criteria E. Any additional questions from the board? Yeah, no? F, will provide for adequate solid and sewage waste disposal. Do we have questions from the board?
Solid waste is trash pickup, right?
Yeah, solid waste
Will
is-
the city go into this development, or do you have to put a dumpster out in front?
My understanding is it would be then assigned to town pickup.
Right, it
Just
would
like
be
any other
curbside
private road.
pickup, even on a
Right.
private road, it'd be curbside pickup. And then you got two components of solid waste. One is obviously during construction, any construction debris is on them to privately haul. And then you've got the household waste once people start living in there, which
Correct.
would be, I believe, curbside pickup.
And there's a lot of detail that conforms to state standards once during road construction, and also when an individual lot and building permit is pulled in terms of how erosion needs to be controlled, sediment needs to be controlled, how a site is managed, both during warm weather and also in the winter. So those are very, very detailed standards that must be complied by the developer or down the road any individual home that is being constructed. And that would be monitored by our great Mr. Scott here, our code enforcement officer, as the development does begin construction and throughout all construction in that development.
Yeah, to give you another follow-up on that, part of the DEP permit will be a third-party reviewer will be there for reviewing erosion control as well.
Go ahead, sure.
One comment in. 26 homes, you're gonna have curbside trash pickup weekly, which the Valley Road does. 2 cans, that's 52 cans outside that road.
Correct?
With the site distance
Or 4 or
questionable now,
8.
they're
No,
gonna be there.
no,
It's not gonna be picked up. They'll actually come into the development. They won't be picked up at Valley
Valley
Road. They'll
Road.
be picked
So
up.
it'll go in.
Correct.
Yeah, yes.
I do have one question here, and again, it's a future issue, I am sure. The plan ultimately for this development calls for a homeowners association. And if I read the plans correctly, we are sharing septic systems
Correct.
between 2 units, correct? And that, to me, would normally be the purview ultimately of a homeowners association, how that would be managed and handled.
Correct.
I just want to be clear about that because, I look at it as a potential resident coming into town, that be clearly spelled out in the homeowners association document so that we don't have wars over who broke the septic system.
Yes.
So I just want to put that on the record. I think it's outside of our purview, but in a shared septic system situation, that's kind of an unknown, I think, for a lot of people that might move into this area.
Yeah, I think that's a benefit to the town overall, that having the homeowners association responsible for both the wells and the septics. Most of the time when there's a number of people involved, it's all taken care of by the association. The association doesn't want to, will have a set schedule of pumping out septic tanks and monitoring the situation. So I think it's better.
So that's the intent.
Yeah, it's better oversight for
Okay.
the overall project.
So that would be the intent,
Yes.
because the developer, until a certain point, I'm not sure at what point, a number of lots sold, et cetera, the homeowners association would then be filed, incorporated, and move forward with that, correct?
Correct.
Scott and I did go through the previous submitted homeowners association documents, and we didn't see anything in there describing what you just described about the septic system. So that may be something that needs to be added to the
It should be.
homeowners association.
It really should be,
It's
I
certainly
think.
the intent of
Yeah.
the developer to set that up and have it.
Exactly. I
yeah.
think it would save a lot of problems
But
down the road.
we will need to, as part of eventual approval on this, have to have a copy of the homeowners executed, as proof that things are being maintained and regulated.
May I ask a question? It's not a public work. Is there a possibility that the public can be aware of when the data is collected regarding the traffic on Valley Road? 2006, 2017, Columbus Day?
Again, I appreciate.
Gather that data to know
Ma'am?
where that statement is?
I appreciate your perspective, okay, but again, this subdivision and the number of units is recorded. It's really out of our purview.
Okay, I
So,
understand. Just
No,
would like
his
to know that
numbers, just to clarify, his numbers are based on what they will generate. It's not based on any of the background on Valley Road.
Those are typically the ITE manual, International Traffic Engineers Manual, has done a bunch of studies, and typically for homes like this, you typically generate somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 trips a day per house.
2006, 11 and a half years later. My question.
Yeah, that would be current, whatever
Yeah,
the current
Yeah.
standard.
those are current
That's what
standards.
I just hope the public will know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This will be on the archives. Okay?
Thank you.
So, do we have any additional questions from the board on criteria F? Moving on to G, will not cause an unreasonable burden on the ability of the town of Raymond to dispose of solid waste and sewage with respect to the use of municipal facilities existing or proposed. Do we have any questions from the board? No. Again, this was,
When we get to that point.
We'll talk about a
We'll talk
condition.
about, there probably should be a
right,
note on
but
there.
again, the town accepted the burden at that time, so we'll move on to H. Will not place an unreasonable burden on the ability of town of Raymond to provide municipal or governmental services. Any questions from the board? Moving on to I, will not have an undue adverse effect on the scenic or natural beauty of the area, aesthetics, historic sites, significant wildlife habitat identified by the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife or the town of Raymond for rare and irreplaceable natural areas, or any public rights for physical or visual access to the shoreline. Well, we don't really have a shoreline here, but again, based on prior approvals, Maine Historic Preservation Commission, Maine IFNW, no objections from the state. And again, we're transferring a substantial portion of this property to the state of Maine as open space, and within the development, each space conserves land of 5 acres and another 7¼ acres for each portion of this development. Is that still correct? Yes, it is.
And I think, what is the 52 acres or?
52
Yeah, a little over
acres.
52.
52 acres is what would be going back to Department of Conservation or IF&W for
Correct.
Morgan Meadows.
Okay, any additional questions from the board on that one? Okay, moving to J. Is in conformance with the subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, zoning ordinance, floodplain management ordinance, or other duly adopted town or ordinance or regulation. In making this determination, the review authority may interpret these ordinances and plans. Do we have any questions from the board? I think if all conditions and notes to the plan can be worked out, that this condition would be met. Any other questions from the board? No? Okay, the subdivider has adequate financial and technical capability to meet the required standards. We will be discussing some conditions on that particular criteria. Do we have questions from the board on this area?
The one note, and again, I'll bring up, it'll be further discussion once we get into it, is this is currently in tree growth.
Correct.
Obviously, it has to be taken out of tree growth and pay the penalties to take it out of tree growth before any permits can be acquired.
Okay, L. The entirety of L is referring to whether it's located in its entirety or partially within the watershed of any pond, lake, or within 250 feet of any wetland, great pond, or river. In this particular case, it is not applicable.
Not those are as defined by mandatory shoreline zoning.
Correct. Is a board in agreement on that?
Yeah.
Okay. M, will not alone or in conjunction with existing activities adversely affect the quality or quantity of groundwater or aquifers. We do have a note that would be talking about as we move forward with this. It's going to require an HHE 200 form approved by a licensed state evaluator for single-family home/condos, subsurface wastewater design. And it is not in a mapped aquifer. Is the board okay with this?
We'll have more discussion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, there's already a very particular, precise nitrate plume for the septic systems and well locations. And one suggestion I'll have when we get to that point is that if there's any amendment to those locations, it'll be the burden of the homeowner or the developer to provide us updated information as to those plume changes. Because you move one 10 feet or 20 feet,
Yes.
it could have an impact if it doubles up with another system.
So we would have a note if we get to the approval stage. Any additional questions from the board on that criteria? No? Based on the federal, moving to N. Still going. Moving to N, based on the Federal Emergency Management Agency's flood boundary and floodway maps and flood insurance rate maps, the information presented by the applicant, whether the subdivision is a flood-prone area, etc. Again, this is not in a flood-prone area or floodplain, so that criteria is non-applicable. Is the board in agreement with that? Yep. Oh. All freshwater wetlands within the proposed subdivision have been identified on any map submitted as part of the application, regardless of the size of these wetlands. We've had a previous discussion regarding remapping that has been submitted as part of the new DEP permit.
Yeah, I guess the question is how do we, eventually we'll have to figure out how we're going to get that to our plans, or some note to our plans at least.
I see, Jim, that we're gonna add that note to the final subdivision plan when we do it.
Okay.
That will be added.
Any questions from the board? Nope. P, any river, stream, or brook as defined in the Natural Resources Protection Act, title blah, 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 within or abutting the subdivision, that is not applicable. There's no formal stream, brook, or river near the property of the developed site. We feel that one's okay? Okay. Q, the subdivision will provide for adequate storm water management. And again, we do have some issues in this area. In essence, you're really asking, without asking, for a waiver of our stormwater management and phosphorus export computations.
Or in lieu, providing us the DP has approved.
And yeah, so instead of giving us our stuff, you're suggesting that the DEP would do that, so we would need a formal waiver request to this board to do that.
Okay?
That this has to be recorded. Jim?
It does need to be recorded. This is kind of because our standards do allow for the methodology to use the DEP standard, the question is going to be, we're going to rely on the DEP to do the review.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, I think the waiver is just that we're going to rely on the DEP to do the review. And whether you make it that a waiver or you just make it a condition that, we'll need approval from the main DEP for the stormwater management permit, we'll get to the same endpoint.
Okay. And again, we have a couple of conditions in that area that we're going to be talking about in a minute. Do we have any questions from the board on criteria Q? No? R, if any lots in the proposed subdivision have shore frontage, blah, 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 blah. Again, in this particular criteria, it doesn't mean it's not applicable. Is board in agreement? I see a lot of shaking of heads. Long-term cumulative effects of the proposed subdivision will not unreasonably increase a Great Pond's phosphorus concentration during the construction phase and life of the proposed subdivision. If we look back to criteria Q, if those conditions are applied, this one would be not applicable. Is the board in agreement? Oh, thank you. And T, for any proposed subdivision that crosses municipal boundaries, blah, blah, blah. This does not, so this criteria is not acceptable, or not applicable. NA says many means. Okay, at this time I want to open for board discussion, consideration of whether the application is complete. Whether the application is complete. We can discuss conditions in the approval phase. Go ahead. Did you say something?
No.
I heard somebody go, So that's what's before us right now, is whether we have enough through these criteria to determine the application is complete. Any discussion, guys?
Tom, do you plan on submitting additional drawings that are updated? All these are, the majority of these are all from '06, and some of the items we talked about are not on there.
In going through the recommendations, I think one of the recommendations is that that set of plans, the subdivision plan, be re-recorded. And in order to do that, we'll have to bring them up to date, so you'll have revised plans all the way through. We'll add the stone sandwich going
Dry
across.
hydrant.
Yeah, some of those details that we've talked about. We'll add all those and make sure that it's complete. We'll obviously have to add notes on the wetlands mapping and all of that.
Would the need to do that make us unable to deem this complete application because we have so many revisions coming?
Well, that's for discussion. We'll have some advice from
From-
Jim. One of the major concerns that I have with the application right now is that so much of it relies on the DEP re-permitting process. And the majority of public concern regards issues with the outcome of that DEP permitting process. So a lot of what we're talking about here would be conditional on that DEP permitting process. So that's the major concern I have at this time. I'm not saying that in the end result it won't all come out wonderful, but I don't know that. And I don't know what challenges may lie ahead within that review by the DEP. Can you help us out, Jim?
I think to Ed's point, there are a few things that are, needed. The question with completeness is, do you have enough information to make a fair discussion and evaluation of the development? Approval is another whole layer. First is, have they submitted enough information so that you can have a reasonable discussion on the topics? Then, if you feel that that's there, you can deem it complete. Then we get into the approval process, and typically we've done this two ways when we have crossover with the DEP. If it's usually just stormwater, we'll defer to the DEP, and we can make that a condition of approval. If there are other components, though, that we're relying on as part of the site location process, sometimes we'll want to see that the DEP is satisfied or the final findings of fact before you make your final. So it just kind of delays your final act waiting for them to get the state approval. So there's two ways you can, handle that. It's totally up to the board. I've seen it that we've made it a condition when it's been fairly simple as a stormwater permit. This one's a little bit different because of the wetlands, the site location component of it. It's a little bit broader and a little bit bigger. So to your point, the board can evaluate.
Okay. So I guess what I'd like the board to discuss is whether we feel we have enough information submitted for the application to be complete. That does not mean we've approved it. It's just that we're saying, we got it, you got your stuff, but we'll be talking in a little bit about moving forward with approval. How does the board feel about that? Or do you still feel, based on Jim's explanation, that we need to hold off on that particular piece?
I think we've got enough information what we have. What we're going to be looking at further is just additions to these plans. I don't think the plans themselves are going to change too much. Just some details that can be dealt with in the approval process. But what he's shown us and what's already on file and available seems fairly adequate, in my opinion, to move forward. And then we can address those issues as we spoke about in the approval process.
Everybody agree with that? Okay. So at this stage, I'll take a motion to approve the application as complete.
I'll second.
I didn't move, I'm taking a motion.
I'll move that the Valley View Acres subdivision application is complete.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Kyle? All in favor? Okay. So we've deemed the application complete. The next thing we need to move to is whether the board, based on the criteria and a number of conditions that we have within those criteria, and I think you've seen those.
Yes.
We feel we're in a position to approve this application at this time. So, board, how would you like to do this? Do you want to talk in general, or do you want to go criteria by criteria and the conditions that are there? I think the main things I'm hearing are, we really need revised drawings. There's a lot of notes that have to be on here, including prior waivers in the subdivision, and we have concerns over the DEP review permit, and as Jim put it, their findings of fact. So how would you like to approach this?
Well, if I may,
Go ahead, Jim.
do you have any anticipation of where DEP is with the review?
You do?
I do. We have a timing issue on cutting the trees. Because we have an Army Corps permit, we're not allowed to cut from June 1st to July 31st. So that's a potential issue for us. DEP is extremely busy. We got some comments from the geologist today that he started looking at it, but I have nothing from the engineer looking at the stormwater. It's my guess that we're probably at least 2 months, if not 3 months out in getting DEP approval. It's just not going to be fast. Even if it's the reapproval of the same project, they're just behind.
Thoughts?
Which the issue will be if we end up getting a permit in the 1st of May, we'll want to cut trees between May 1st and June 1st. and the timing of the board's approval may be the issue at that point. So my guess is we will want to be back on your agenda probably in April, and we'll look for a revised set of plans and potentially an update from DEP. And at that point, we would hope that we would get approval pending DEP permit, Jim's review of that, and then we would bring Mylars back to you to sign, but we would be able to do tree cutting between
Understood.
in May.
Understood.
I think that makes logical sense.
Yep.
You know, because hopefully by April, they'll have correspondence going back and forth between the geologist and probably the engineer on the stormwater components. I think in the interim, you know, you've got some notes, we have some things that we want to go through. I've got those kind of listed as conditions. Ideally, maybe we just go through, because I think those kind of address the concerns that you may have, and maybe you want more on the end. We kind of establish what our concerns are that we would have had for conditions, and maybe in the interim between now and April, we can work with Tom and Chase Holmes to rectify those things.
Right.
So that when we get back in April, we'll have the DP, but we won't have a long list of conditions if we can address
Does
them.
that sound agreeable to you?
Yeah, that's more than fine. We'll work with
Okay.
Jim to
So
straighten out those.
what we're going to do next is go through the conditions, make sure we're all very clear about what needs to be noted and revised on the plans, and we will be holding final approval until April.
Or until we have DEP.
Until we have, if that's March, so be it. Or
Some kind of correspondence from DEP stating that the approval is forthcoming, or they actually have the findings of fact.
right. And I think, unless I'm misstating the case, that the board would like to see that before final approval. Is that correct? If that is not going to happen within your time frame, we'll deal with it at that time. Is that fair?
We're screwed.
What is the final date on the tree clearing? Is that July
July 31st.
31st? So
Yeah. Well, come on now. You've been waiting since 2006.
I know.
I gotta go to work, and I make one last comment.
Sure, sir.
But everybody that knows Raymond knows the Valley Road, one of them, and you like nature, go to the top of the hill and look it all over. Because when this project goes through, it's gonna be one less that Raymond has.
Yeah.
That's been overlooked. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we can do this one of two ways with Jim's guidance, because we have brought up a number of other issues, Jim, as we've gone.
try to keep track of them.
Okay, so rather than go back through each criteria and the conditions in that format, what I'd like to do is go to the end of Jim's memorandum in terms of the standard conditions. And Jim, if you can help us as we go for additions. Does that
Okay.
make
Yep.
an efficient sense? Okay?
And going right off the bat, I think one of the things, Tom, that we'll need to figure out is there were conditions and some waivers previously.
Correct.
And now, and we've just got to kind of correlate on the plan what was carried over from the past approval and what's going to be new on the new one.
Right. We want to make sure that the final recorded plan has everything, so that
Yes.
as we go down the road, okay?
Yeah. What I anticipate, what we've been doing lately is, we end up with so many notes that we'll probably end up with two sheets.
Yeah.
One sheet will be just notes, which will be conditions of approval. We'll add whatever conditions you have right to the plan. We'll put the waivers on that. We'll put
Right.
any of the DEP restrictions on that and that type of thing.
Okay.
And then the first plan will be the boundary and what it looks like and all of that.
Okay.
One thing, Tom, too, I saw is before you had a subdivision plan and a condominium plan. Will you be needing a updated or somehow cross-reference the condominium plan to the new subdivision plan, or do you want to assign a new condominium plan as well?
We'll probably sign them both, Jim. I think we're going to end up with,
It just makes it easy for the record if we
Yeah,
can do that for.
Have everything re-recorded at the same time?
yes.
Okay. All right, so I think that's the first one. I think we're directing staff to get all prior waivers, and we want to make a note Well, I guess the DEP thing right now is in abeyance because we haven't seen that document, but we do have to say we're going to rely on it rather than the town calculations for the phosphorus and runoff. So,
Yeah, one of the things I require when we have a DEP permit is that the actual permit number and date of approval be on the final subdivision plan anyway.
okay.
So we do have that cross-reference, so we'll
Okay.
have that one way or the other.
Okay. So do we need to actually grant that waiver, or are we okay?
I think you want to hold off on all waivers till we
Till we get the DEP stuff.
list compiled.
Okay.
I don't know if, I think more of these were conditions and maybe waivers. I think there was a previous
Correct.
waiver for the road length,
Right.
and I'm not sure, did we see anything else for actual I think that was the formal one. I think the other one may have been as part of
The
that.
road length and the second access point was waived?
Yes, and yeah, and as part of that, part of the other condition that came with that was the issue with the sprinklers, that in lieu of, right now we've got a dry hydrant, so it's gonna be, you have dry hydrants and sprinklers, so
Correct.
the fire suppression, it's not gonna be a waiver, but it was kind of all bundled in there
Yeah.
as part of the grand scheme of things, so
Okay.
we at
So-
least have two waivers for two distinct access points and the length of the road.
Correct, and those were previously approved, so we
Correct.
want to make sure those get on there, so it doesn't come up again in the future. In terms of Jim's memo, the first one is the deferring to the main DEP. And at this point, until we have that document in hand, I don't think we want to add that as a condition, or do we? Should we leave that in abeyance until
Well, one way or
such
the
time?
other, it's either gonna be a note or a condition on the
What do you
drawing.
think, Mr. Vice Chair?
I wrote waive, so I guess I
Okay, then,
waive.
the first one would be then, because ultimately, no matter what we decide to do with that document, it would need to be included in the plan. I think we're going to reference it
Right.
and approve it in lieu of our normal standards. But again, since the application has not been approved, it will save us time in the end if we put this note or condition on the plan, correct?
Fair enough.
So stormwater phosphorus export treatment will be deferred to the main DEP with proof of their approval of the revised stormwater management permit for the phosphorus standard. We could do these all, let's just go through them, and then if we have any additions, we'll get those down, and then we can do it all in one motion. Does that work for you guys? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the second one is the applicant shall add a note on the plan of the requirement for all main DEP permits, and add a note that prior to commencing construction on any house unit, a site-specific grading plan for each lot showing preserved buffer for soil disturbance and erosion control measures shall be provided to the code enforcement officer.
And that would be part of the building permit process.
Correct.
But just wanted it on the drawing.
A note should be added confirming wetland filling impacts as well as confirmation that no vernal pool presence on the property as of 2017.
That's actually 2016, but that's still
Right.
within the 5-year,
Yeah,
that correct,
As of
Tom? You did that in
2016,
2016, right?
Correct.
yeah. All drainage easements will be set with iron pins with caps to define their limits. I'm counting on you to go whoa, whoa, if you have a whoa, whoa, okay?
I will. I'm pretty good at that.
All right. The applicant shall add a note stating that each home unit will be constructed with a sprinkler system for fire suppression. This was a condition in the original.
We'll probably wrap that one into the waiver.
Okay. Is this a good place to put the dry well?
Well, the dry hydrant, I think we'll need the final location and details for the proposed fire dry hydrant. Dry,
Location.
fire dry hydrant, yeah.
Will you need an easement for that across the personal lot?
Yeah, we'll need, with easements and, basically that goes with the whole details and everything, so. We'll need location, easement, and details for proposed dry hydrant to be reviewed by the fire department.
We'll get on the
Yeah.
fire department specifications for dry hydrant installations.
Thanks, that would help.
Okay. So I'm calling that 5A at the moment. final location and details for the dry hydrant with easement and details for fire department approval. Does that work?
Chairman, if I could, just one point on that.
Yep.
David Maines, Raymond Fire Inspector. With the dry hydrant, I hadn't seen it in anything in the plan, so I didn't have this in my comments in my memo, but the location at that intersection, my only concern is access, to be able to put a pumper at that to access it and still be able to get by it. So I'd like to look at
Widening the shoulder.
to grading that shoulder so that there's a spot at the that you could actually pull a truck off the road, because it's not really a two-way road if we're trying to get trucks in. If I'm trying to get apparatus into a structure further in, I don't want to be blocking it with the one accessing the dry hydrant.
Okay.
That would be a typical requirement that we'd have for any dry hydrant location.
So you'll do that with your review?
We will, yeah.
Within the review
Yeah, that would be-
process?
that would be
The
part
other
of the
thing that was
details.
raised throughout all of this was the naming of the road and a review as to whether it's going to cause mass confusion in town with Valley this and Valley that.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, the 911 requirements don't allow similar named roads. So the use, because we have a valley road, using valley in the names of the roads for the subdivision would not be allowed from 911 standards.
We'll get you a couple of names.
So I'm going to call that 5B. Road names will comply with the 911 standards. Does that work?
That's 6, right?
Yeah, it's right on 6.
It's already on 6.
Oh, sorry. Never mind. That's number 6. The applicant shall provide a note discussion how household and construction solid waste will be handled within the development during and post-construction.
Yeah, that'd just be a standard note.
Yeah, because it's pretty detailed in here. The applicant shall provide, I just read that. Number 8, the developer shall provide adequate proof of financial and technical capacity prior to any issuance of any construction permit or prior to any construction activity or soil disturbance on the property.
One thing that, just so people in the public are aware of too, that is not the actual bond. When the road will be constructed and all the measures, erosion control, water, all that is put in, the town will require a performance bond be placed to meet the cost of the improvements, such that if the developer, for whatever reason, is default on that, they'd have the ability to pull that bond and complete those.
Complete the infrastructure.
That's a typical process, but it's different than the actual financial capacity. Financial capacity is that they have the means now to afford the development.
The next one, number 9, again, this is our discussion of taking it out of tree growth status, and that all fees for the conversion of taxes will be paid prior to any construction work or clearing for the development. Yep. Number 10, any revision to the proposed wells or septic locations for any unit or alteration of the well exclusion zone as shown may require a revised nitrate plume study investigation to be submitted to the CEO prior to any issuance of a building permit. Such costs and responsibilities won't be ours. Homeowner or developer. A note shall be added per Article 10C, Administration, Expiration of Approval.
Yeah, that note comes into compliance now. It was part of the, part of the lawyer's review, in that the previous one didn't really have an expiration date on it.
Right.
We passed that in June, so as Tom mentioned, it kind of got very confusing for us with what we can review. However, going forward, because this is now falling under a new review, it'll be subject to all those sunset provisions of
Correct.
4 years to, I think it's 2 years to commence and 4 years to complete, unless they so choose to ask for extension of that. And it goes up to 5 years, I think, to complete.
The next one, again, is more of a discussion before we kind of finalize it, which is the future acceptance of the road. How will treatment ponds be attached with the road design, and who will be responsible if the road is to be accepted by the town? The inclusion of the rock sandwich was not current town standard. normal standard design practice within a typical street. May also complicate future acceptance consideration due to its uniqueness and potential repair or maintenance considerations. Do we have thoughts on how to handle that?
Yeah, I think this one comes into a couple things. I think this one starts the conversation about the homeowners association and what they're going to be responsible for. I think obviously the future acceptance of the road is that, just that, it's a future conversation, but I think if, we, like we have done, prepare them saying this rock sandwich could be an issue for a future consideration of the town acceptance. And then the other conversation with that is, which is always comes up, one reason that many of the roads haven't been accepted for town roads is, how do you differentiate between the stormwater provisions and the road? Because the stormwater provisions are for the benefit from the road runoff. So there's always, the town doesn't want to take that on, so that becomes a homeowner's thing. So I think a lot of this has to come down to what's in the homeowner's document for us in the present, and then what they do in the future is up to them.
Okay.
But I think right now we need to see, again, we don't get into telling them how to develop or build their homeowners association, but I think we need to see the components that are going to that.
So I think then this note is part of what will be worked on, which is updated homeowners association documents that would address these issues,
And your
along
septic.
with the shared septic. Yep.
Septic's in well.
So we'll
Yep.
call this updated HOA docs.
This also mentions the treatment ponds, this paragraph.
I'm sorry, one more time, Ed?
This paragraph also mentions the treatment ponds, and I did have a concern about those. They have an 8-foot depth of permanent and a 2-to-1 slope. They'd be attractive for kids to come and play in the area.
Oh, yeah,
You
be
step
great
into
places.
a 2-in-1 slope and it's muddy, they're going to slide right under. Will that be fenced in, or?
No.
No?
No, we typically don't fence them when they're open and obvious, and we think these being located where they are behind the homes, where the homeowners can see them, that we don't fence them in. If they were buffered, screened, and out of the way, then we would fence them in, is usually the standard rule. But yeah, they're likely to become skating ponds, polywog ponds. Occasionally, we see people put fish in them. It's not supposed to be fish, but that type of thing happens.
I think one of the things that's also changed is, Tom, maybe you can elaborate on that, is the actual design of the pond itself, the way they have shelves and things
Yeah.
like that
Yeah,
for
there is a
safety
safety
protection. So it's not just a straight slope
Yeah,
down
it
to
has
the...
I think it shows a shelf on the top, above the
Yeah.
top of the water, but then it goes 2-to-1 down, doesn't
And
it?
if it's a permanent wet pond, it'll have
Yeah.
a layer of riprap.
Yeah, it has a shelf all the way around, so that when the pond is full, if you end up in it, there's a shelf there 10 feet wide that it's only a foot deep, that you can crawl out on.
Oh, okay. Maybe I must have misunderstood the way.
All right, moving on to number 13. All plans should be stamped and marked with dates relevant to this approval period. It is acceptable to note the project was approved and re-recorded in 2006. We recommend that the this is your, again, the note would be, these will all be re-recorded with new dates and the notes that we've just gone through.
Yeah, that kind of gives us a fresh starting block.
I think so. If we care about anybody that's to come after us, it would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. Did we have any other notes or issues that are not covered?
Just the rock sandwich detail.
Yeah, I put that in the updated HOA docs,
Okay.
okay?
But that's a simple thing to put on the detail sheet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe it ended up at the Army Corps detail and just never made the drawings.
Okay, so at this time, I think it would be appropriate to move these items, conditions into the record and allow the gentleman to work on them.
I don't think you need to do that. I think you just need to table the application. Jim and I will work on them
Yeah.
as
Does that
part of
work?
it,
That-
and
Okay.
then get
I mean,
back to you.
You're on the record by just discussing them.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think Tom has them in writing, and, and he's got
You
the
guys will
updates as
work on
well.
them. Okay.
I think the idea would be exactly, table this, let us work this out, and then in the interim, hopefully we'll have some DEP input if anything changes within that.
Okay. So, we need a motion to table the application.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Patricia seconds, all in favor? Aye. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Okay.
I have something other than the planner communications that's come up.
Okay.
We were going to discuss the signing of Malibu Lane, but I think Mary's already pointed out that
Correct.
that's been taken care of. One thing that we do have, which came in January 30th from the DEP, is when we approved the shoreline zoning last year,
Yes,
a copy was supposed to be submitted to the DEP for their final
Correct.
review. They did do that. They came back with a list of things that they'd like to see amended or changed, a couple definition added, some cleanup work, basically. That is a change to our ordinance. So the question that has come up from Sue is, we need to get this before the board as soon as possible, such that we can get it on the town charter. Now, what I looked up within the land use is that if it were a land use item, it would have to have 2-week notice, be approved by the board, then subject to a select review, their own public hearing. The problem is that this has got to get on for March, which is a March, can't
It'll be
remember
the day before our meeting, or.
13th?
Yeah, the day
12th or
before.
13th?
It'll be the 13th.
13th. So with that, the way the public notice goes, there's no way for us to do that and get it on for public hearing. However, when I looked at the shoreline zoning, it doesn't necessarily follow the same format as the land use ordinance.
okay.
So I just want to make you aware that you may be asked to maybe do an emergency meeting at some point, just so we can all kind of get this to go through. We're going to confirm with Phil Saucier, the town's attorney, if it is in fact, this can go directly to the council and not be bothered with you, because I believe that is the case under shoreline zoning. All this is to that point, and maybe we can even make a document, give the board the document that we have. It's just,
Is it minor, pretty
it's-
much minor housekeeping?
some of it is minor, some of it is just referencing various sections of the ordinance, and I think a lot of it is under tree harvesting.
Harvesting, some definitions.
And there's a few definitions like excavation contractor, things that we're fine with. I don't think there's anything there. But it's just format and the way they like to see it in the ordinance, so they've picked that apart, and then before they will sign off on it, we need to make these changes.
Okay.
So I'm just making you aware of it. We may be asked to make an emergency meeting, if that's the case, comes back from Phil. Looking at it, I'm not sure, but I
Okay.
don't think so. I think it can go directly to the council, just so that if you do see it go to the council, you're aware of what it is, and you're not felt like you've been blindsided or anything like that. And I think we can make this document, maybe scan this and give you a copy of it, just so
That'd be
you
great,
can all
just
see.
so if we're ever asked a
Right.
question.
But we would like to get this obviously rectified this coming year, the June election.
Yes.
So, other than that, I don't think
Any
there's-
other planner communications, anything in the pipe, or?
No, not to my knowledge. Haven't heard any inquiries or anything solid at this time, anyway.
Okay. Does the board have any items or issues they'd like to bring up for the good of
Just-
you?
If you could check the schedule, the most recent one that I got through the email had this meeting on the 16th.
Or was that
Well,
2000?
it's always the second Wednesday of the month.
Well, that's what I
Sure
figured,
that
so
happened.
I had planned for, what's today? Today's February.
14th.
Right.
Valentine's Day.
Oh, I'm looking at the submission deadline. So I looked at it. I'm like, listen, this seems.
It gets
right,
ahead. You
right, okay.
We're gonna give you a big
My
highlighter.
bad, thank you.
Hey, it's not impossible.
The only other item I'd like us to kind of keep rolling around is the design guidelines. I don't know if any member of the board has had a chance to review those.
Yep.
The only thing that it says in there is that a note should be on all plans regarding them.
Did we send that to Mary?
We sent
I
it to
think
Mary.
we
Yeah, there's
did.
Obviously, that's something that's probably not gonna get on this June.
No.
It's too late in the game, but it's obviously, that's a big,
It is.
it's a big ticket item if it does, if you, it's something you do wanna change, so obviously start discussing now, and if we have some time when we're less busy, it might be
Yeah.
beneficial to
What I'd
occasionally bring it up.
suggest is that you use your discretion in terms of the agenda, where if we have a very late night, perhaps we could take a section of it and just have some discussion. Because personally, when I finished it, I'm like, so what is this? I mean, they're guidelines, you can't enforce them, there's no ordinance backing any of
Yeah,
it.
all you could do is the word I use is strong arm an applicant saying, yeah, you should comply with these, and if they don't, you can play a game,
but
well,
it's
okay,
like,
but
you know-
eventually somebody's gonna have to blink.
I know, in
Right.
our commercial corridor, I mean, it has to be kind of like all for one and one for all. I mean, are you gonna put La Mexicana up here? Like an outlot in the front, and I mean, that whole downtown corridor is modeled after front parking, and we're talking huge redevelopment if that ever happens.
Well, and I think the thing that we all figured out is with those guidelines is it was, an idea and a concept to how to build a village-type atmosphere.
Sure, it'll be really
Problem with
nice
that
and quaint.
is it's hugely dependent upon the economic conditions going on. And obviously, within just 10 or 15 years, people's ideas of what they want to look at and aesthetics change. So it may be warrant to look at and say, how do we do this? Because it was kind of black and white in some areas with the front parking. And as we found out with some of the changes to the shopping center down there and some of the other businesses, that it becomes a real burden for them if they're going to lose that front parking.
Yep.
Where do they put it, the cost to do that, and because usually when they're doing that, they're already in the building trying to make improvements to the building, and they're thinking that the site's good to go. And if that's not the case, it could put an extra burden on redevelopment. And if we're trying to redevelopment, do we want the buildings to look better, or there's a happy medium there somewhere, and it's tough to figure out.
I think. I would like just in general for us to, I mean, what are we gonna do with this stuff? I just feel that it's not enforceable. I get where it's coming from.
And then, as to Mary's comment, the thing that we're starting to see a trend on is form-based ordinances where you're looking at the architecture in its scale and its mass. And coming up with some standards for that and looking at some of the architecture features rather than getting into the detail of colors and roof types and things like that, but you're looking more of the mass and how it fits on the property than the, it has to go here, it has to go here.
Right.
Still, it can be a little bit controversial because every beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Right, and what I feel now is we have this great document that we really don't pay much attention to, and that's the thing that bothers me, is that we have this thing hanging out there, but we don't seem to.
Right, and we
do much with
do,
it.
most of the conditions,
why I
we
pulled
make
at the
people
beginning.
address that to the best of their ability, but again, it's widely subjective. We have no standards in place.
Oh, yeah.
You have Dunkin' Donuts, you have all these things that, no flat roofs.
Oh, the whole section on franchise buildings is like, oh, you're, what? What? We're gonna do that?
Yeah.
Or do we want, another piece of economy in the town? I
And the
mean,
other
we've
thing
got
too
that
is our
issue.
commercial district is relatively small.
Yeah.
So it's not like, we're gonna see a huge influx of new development.
Well,
all of a
there's a
sudden.
couple of ways to do this, is just leave it as it is and just keep moving forward.
Or eliminate it.
We'll eliminate it. I'm not sure anybody would notice, but
Well, it'd be that would be something that would have to be done again as an ordinance change. Take it out of the ordinance would be required to change. I mean, there might be some discussion about.
So how is it worked into the ordinance but not, what I mean? How
It's
do we?
worked into the ordinance that they have to address the.
So we just have to say, hey, I looked at it, I don't really like it,
Well,
I'm
their
gonna use this
guidelines.
trim versus that trim, so I can say I meant it, but,
Sure.
I mean, if you go into the guidelines, to Sheila's point, it gets into very, very specific architectural features and standards for pedestrian access and bicycles and everything like that, but the applicant can just say, yeah, we put a bike thing over here, and, and yeah, that
Well, and I
dresses,
think-
and how do you challenge that if there's
No, and I
no
think
standard for that?
there are cases where, as part of what we do, we have those discussions in terms of like lighting, not polluting,
Right.
being more focused. There's this whole section about signs, which I'm like, we have a sign ordinance that's very detailed, so I didn't even bother to try to reconcile the two, but, I do think you know, like with La Mexicana, we talked about the shrubbery and the screening and, you know, things like that. So we do, in some of those cases, get into those pieces, but not to the extent that these guidelines go into, so.
And I think it was all based on, again, aesthetics, going down Main Street, building that village.
Oh, I understand the
Yeah.
concept behind it.
And
but
maybe
how-
there's ways you can put standards in place that are, you know, again, are a little bit, not as specific, but again, such that you can get a little attitude on a developer to say, that doesn't quite meet the standard.
Right.
You know, you're doing the same thing, it's just that, you know, you kind of get blindsided to your point, that you look at that and you look at the examples and you look at all the specific details and
Yeah, and we're certainly not
I don't think we've had anybody's
conducting,
even come close to meeting that 100%.
no, we don't conduct our review and approvals at all based on that.
Yeah.
You know, and just for me, I'm uncomfortable having a governing document that we're not upholding, if you will.
Right.
But there's no power of enforcement in there.
That's just how they wanted it. I was there when they created
Yep.
the thing, and it's exactly what they wanted.
Yep.
And I would either do nothing with it or get rid of it, one or
Exactly.
the other. I wouldn't do anything else.
So I think it's worth us just continuing to talk about it. I mean,
And hopefully we'll get some feedback from Mary or
yeah.
Bernstein Shore about how we, what we can do or what they recommend.
Maybe we're looking at other
It doesn't
similar
have
towns
to
and how
do
they're
with-
addressing their commercial districts, stuff like, is there other,
That's what I'm saying, is that I think Wyndham's now looking at form-based architecture, and they have the same, almost the identical document for
Really?
guidelines.
Well, you can tell,
Same
a lot of
firm.
it,
Same
a lot of
guy,
it
same
was,
firm.
Terry
and even
DeWine.
where there's, if you really read it closely, they've made the typos to, you can tell it was a cut and paste job.
Yeah, it was, I think it was really all, basically originated from North Conway,
yeah.
that whole scheme.
We
in
paid
North Conway.
$10,000 for that.
I could have cut and pasted for cheaper than that.
All right,
Okay,
well,
so-
we'll continue to look into that. Is there anything else that the board has for?
I don't think so. We
Move
all
to
good?
adjourn?
Can I have a second? Patricia seconds, all in favor? Aye, aye. Thanks, Sean.